I want to talk about Wendi Adelson's behavior and speech patterns on the stand. What strikes me about it is what appears to be the subtle use of hypnosis techniques, in particular pacing and leading and mirroring.
You remember sitting outside on the patio?
I do.
And it was you and Mr. Lacoste and Charlie and a woman named Catherine Mag.
So one thing we'll see her do frequently is this kind of almost trance-like stare, slowly moving her head around, and these slow blinks. And to me, this looks like if you want to induce a sort of suggestible state in someone, right? This is what hypnosis says. If you want to induce a suggestible trance-like state, you need to first mirror the words or behaviors of your subject, and then try to start setting the pace yourself. And so what this kind of slow staring and slow blinking in particular looks like to me is trying to slow down the pace, try to actually induce a trance by going into a semi-trance-like state yourself. If you find that your conversation partner is suggestible, you'll find that they'll also slow down and go into this trance, and your goal is a suggestible state that comes with being this sort of relaxed, slowed down, suggestible state, right?
After dinner, you and Jeff Lacoste stayed at Charlie's house, right?
We did.
After dinner, you and Jeff Lacoste.
You can see how slow those blinks
stayed at
are.
Charlie's house, right?
We did. I don't really remember if I was nervous around him, but I started thinking it wasn't the right relationship.
He started accusing you of being unfaithful, right?
He did.
He accused you of having an affair with someone that you had previously dated?
He did.
Excuse me. You told him that you didn't. You denied it.
That's right.
And he didn't believe you.
He did not.
Before this individual that you used to date, you had coffee with at a place called All Saints in Tallahassee, right?
I did.
And Mr. Lacoste saw you having coffee with this individual, right?
He did.
And that caused a confrontation. Is that fair to say?
He flew into a rage.
He basically exploded at you.
He did.
He yelled at you for hours.
He did.
He accused you of having affairs with multiple people.
He did.
You were very upset, to say the least.
I was devastated. Yeah.
So there's also repetition and mirroring in her speech patterns. So the way she answers questions most often is, he did, or I did, or I did not. And so part of that is just the pure repetition of it.
He basically exploded at you.
He did.
He yelled at you for hours.
He did.
He accused you of having affairs with multiple people.
He did.
So the repetition part is another form of pacing. The same way you can use your mannerisms to slow down the pace, you can use repetition to kind of induce an inertia. Giving different sorts of answers kind of creates this, back and forth sort of dynamic that keeps people kind of alert. But if you give just the same answer over and over again, that alertness might go down as people are getting used to the kind of momentum or inertia of the conversation. And again, that can promote a kind of trance-like suggestible state. Now, I'm not saying she's trying to literally induce a trance, but she's trying to perhaps induce a minor form of a trance-like state that is essentially heightened suggestibility. I don't know if Wendi Adelson has ever formally trained in hypnosis, but oftentimes people that are formally trained in persuasion will know some of these techniques because there's a significant overlap between the literature on persuasion and the literature that is more in the niche of hypnosis. If you look at Robert Cialdini, who wrote Persuasion, and then Scott Adams, who's talked about the relationship between hypnosis and persuasion outright, I would suggest that being a high-powered attorney, as Wendi Adelson is, or has been, would make it reasonably likely that she was familiar with persuasion techniques. And so that those persuasion techniques are maybe where she's getting this hypnotic kind of practice.
You went down to South Florida on June 30th, and you and the boys stayed with your parents, right?
We did.
You had the boys with you the whole time.
Yes.
Dan Markel didn't have the boys at that point in time. The boys were with you.
Yes.
And Charlie knew that, right?
Yes, he was with us.
So Charlie Adelson also does the slow blinks. So I don't know if that's possibly this is just something that is almost a genetic tendency to just have these sorts of slow blinks. Or perhaps they're unconsciously colluding and trying to create a suggestible state in the courtroom. Or they're responding to each other's pacing, maybe by these nonverbal cues. I don't know. I know this is kind of an out there theory, but I couldn't help but notice when I was watching this testimony, there's something kind of bizarre about it, right? About her state.
When you got back to Tallahassee, you saw Mr. Lacoste on July 13th.
That sounds right.
And when you saw him, it was not a good meeting. Is that fair to say? It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Just to catch you up on what they're talking about. So Dan Markel was murdered in 2014. The members of the Latin Kings gang that actually carried out the murder have already been prosecuted and are incarcerated. At the time of the murder, Wendi Adelson and the victim, Dan Markel, had been in an extremely acrimonious divorce for several years. And at the time of the murder, Wendi Adelson was dating someone named Jeffrey Lacoste. So that's what they're talking about. When they're talking about Mr. Lacoste, they're talking about her relationship with this new boyfriend post-divorce with Dan Markel, who was murdered. Now, Jeffrey Lacoste has since claimed that Wendi Adelson had talked to him about Charlie, her brother, Charlie Adelson's plot to hire a hitman to kill her ex-husband, Dan. So it's in Wendi Adelson's interest now to make claims that that boyfriend, Lacoste, had some anger issues, bitterness, flew into a rage at one point. She needs to undermine Lacoste's testimony about this conversation of a hit. So that's sort of the context of what they're talking about right now, but I'm more interested in analyzing the behavior and speech patterns for this video.
You saw him the next day at a yoga studio,
I went to yoga and he wanted to come.
and it was awkward
It was.
and kind of tense.
It was.
And he asked to see you again later that week,
He did.
and you didn't want to.
I did not.
So there you go. So that repetition again, or that style of answering questions, it's like, it was awkward, it was. He didn't blah, he didn't. So this is the mirroring part. So before you had the repetition of I did. Now you have a mirroring where the attorney uses a certain verb, like it was blank, and she says it was. So she's now mirroring the attorney by just repeating those same basic verbs. It was, I did. And again, in hypnosis, the reason for mirroring is you first want to be mirroring the subject, and then you start testing whether you can lead them. So it's like first you're mirroring, and then you give these little tests to see if you can take the lead. And once you have the lead and you see them mirroring, then you know you've achieved your suggestible state.
You never saw him again, right?
No.
So, okay, that's interesting too. So you never saw him again, right? She says no. So at that point, she abandons her usual pattern of saying, I did, it was, I did not. That time she doesn't say, I did not. She says, no. Now, remember, she's a lawyer, right? So you have to think she knows what she's doing this whole time. She's definitely quite intelligent. I don't know if she is as intelligent as she believes she is, but I can't deny, I think she's very intelligent. But so why would she only say no that time? Theoretically, her saying no there could be no, I never saw him again, or it could be no, that's not right. Because the attorney said, you never saw him again, right? She says, no. So she's giving herself the possibility of answering a question without answering the question. I don't know if in this case she's saying it because she doesn't want to admit that she saw him again. So she's giving herself this out of just saying no, rather than being more precise and saying, I did not see him again. It's just that kind of strategy I'm suggesting might be the kind of thing she's capable of doing because she knows sort of the lines around perjury, and she knows that she has plausible deniability in this case to say, oh, well, I was saying no, that's not right. If it comes out that she saw him again, right? Let's listen to that again.
And it was awkward
It was.
and kind of tense.
It was.
And he asked to see you again later that week,
He did.
and you didn't want to.
I did not.
You never saw him again, right?
No.
No, that's not right. Or no, I never saw him again.
You and the kids by Professor Markel's house in the afternoon or morning of July 17, 2014, correct?
It would be some other woman and some other kids.
So there, instead of answering that question directly, which would have been correct, right? So the question was, if someone saw you at your now murdered ex-husband's house on July 17th, which would have been the day before the murders, that couldn't have been you, correct? And she says it would have been some other woman and some other kids. So this to me is a sort of an attempt at leading. Rather than merely answering the question, she's now trying to implant a suggestion of it was someone else, right? Which is sort of, it's proposing information that no one else has brought up. What they've brought up is there was witness testimony that it's her. She's now saying that was some other woman and some other kids. It must have been. So she's trying to make this suggestion, is what I'm saying, rather than merely saying it wasn't me or that's correct. It was someone else.
The person would be wrong if they said that they saw you and the kids by Professor Markel's house in the afternoon or morning of July 17, 2014, correct?
It would be some other woman and some other kids.
And again, holding that kind of trance-like facial expression.
I want to talk a little bit more about July 18th.
So the day of the murder.
Do you recall leaving your house that day on Aqua Ridge Ray around 12:30 in the afternoon?
I do.
And you were going to meet a friend for lunch at a place called Mosaic.
Yes.
But you had to pick up a bottle of, I don't know if it's bourbon or whiskey. I don't even know if they're the same things. But
Interesting Freudian slip there by the attorney. You had to pick up a body.
Bullet whiskey.
It was bourbon.
Okay.
Wow, and bullet whiskey. I mean, these are just interesting verbal coincidences. I mean, the fact that he accidentally says body and the fact that it's bullet whiskey.
It was for your friend's wedding shower that night.
So just interesting, almost tragic irony. So a Freudian slip with body, and then it's bullet whiskey. I mean, just strange kind of coincidences there. I'm not ascribing any meaning to that. That's just.
They were having us stock the bar party, so they asked for specific kinds of alcohol to stock the bar.
I mean, if you really want to ascribe the kind of worst possible motive to her buying bullet bourbon or bullet whiskey, you could wonder if it was a kind of in-joke with herself that she got this bullet brand and brought it to this party. But again, I think it's a reach.
And your lunch was interrupted by Investigator Isom, who told you that something had happened.
That's right.
You went with him voluntarily to
I
speak
did.
with him? You let police search your car?
Yes.
You were interviewed with the investigator from approximately 2:45 p.m. until 7:50 p.m.?
Yes.
He told you that your ex-husband had been shot and was unlikely to survive, right?
Yes.
You were in shock.
Yes.
You were pretty open with police, telling them a lot of things, right?
They kept telling me they needed my help, and so I kept trying to help.
Now, you remember on direct, Ms. Kappelman asked you about this interview.
Yes.
And she asked you about all the people you mentioned during the interview, including Charlie.
Yes.
And you said I was just wheeling off names, right?
Yes.
In fact, isn't the first person in the interview that you mentioned was yourself?
Yes.
You said that you would understand if you were viewed as the prime suspect, right?
Yes.
Before you mentioned anyone else, you mentioned yourself.
Yes.
You told them about the motion to relocate.
I did.
You told them about the fight you had with Professor Markel that very morning about some swimming for the boys.
Yes.
So, okay, I think Wendi Adelson listing herself or naming herself as the first person of interest, or saying that probably I would be the primary suspect because if anyone has a reason to kill him, I'm in an acrimonious divorce, I'm the ex-wife. You know, I think this could be seen as a kind of persuasive honesty. You know, she understands criminal investigation, so on the one hand, even if she weren't in an extremely acrimonious divorce, she's the ex, right? So often suspicion goes there by default. But also she's saying, I'm going to be forthright about the fact that we've been embattled here. And so, you know, I'm not surprised that she would list herself first, almost regardless of her involvement. You know, I think the attorney seems to be sort of highlighting this, but I could see that part going either way. In my opinion, the thing that actually implicates her most is not the fact that she said I would be a reasonable person of interest when the investigators asked. It's that what she's referencing there, the relocation dispute, was about Dan Markel essentially barring her from moving the kids down to Miami, where Wendi Adelson's family is primarily in Miami or South Florida. That's where her parents are. The whole family wanted the kids to move down there. Dan Markel is up in North Florida. He believed it would be unfair for this relocation to happen, and so he went through the courts to prevent Wendi Adelson from moving down to South Florida. He also went through the courts to bar unsupervised visits between Wendi Adelson's parents and his kids, their kids, because of demeaning or degrading statements that Wendi Adelson's parents, especially Donna, her mom, were making about Dan Markel to the kids. So essentially telling the kids, your father's no good, maybe in meaner language than that. So there's this intrafamilial dispute. But what I think is the most implicating to Wendi Adelson is the fact that it wasn't even 48 hours after the murder that she did in fact relocate to South Florida. But I think the bigger question that I'm sort of wondering, having watched this video and seen her kind of power of influence, or at least that which she seems to project as this persuasive, hypnotic power over people, you have to wonder, you know, with her family dynamics, there seems to be a degree of enmeshment baked in to the family dynamics from what I can tell. You know, is it possible that she actually never said anything outright about wanting her ex-husband killed? She merely was relaying the information, perhaps in a certain way that conveyed the life or death kind of urgency of her situation, and then her family, perhaps accustomed to doing whatever Wendi Adelson wants at all costs, took these drastic measures. Now, some caveats. Wendi Adelson is not even on trial at this point because there's no outright evidence that she was involved in the planning or execution of this hit. Charlie Adelson is on trial because there is evidence of his involvement via his girlfriend, Catherine, and her relationship to the actual hitman. But Charlie Adelson is also innocent until proven guilty. I'm essentially saying if it is true that there was this Adelson family conspiracy to murder Dan Markel, what does it mean if Wendi Adelson persuaded it without ever saying it? So that to me is an interesting question and a reason that I'm sort of just curious to be following this case right now. I don't have more time to dig more into this at the moment, but I appreciate your attention as always. Often my goal is to sort of come at these cases from an angle that I haven't seen other people do. And so that's just my current take on the mannerisms, speech, and behavior of Wendi Adelson, but I will continue to follow along. Thank you.